So we are recording, and welcome to the session on leveraging the science and engineering practices to develop content knowledge and language, developing models, the bridge to scientific explanations. So my name is Kelly Cooney, and I'm super excited to be here. I am a small consulting company that is based in Massachusetts. I also work in Rhode Island. I'm a former Head Start student, so I'm very upset about the state of Head Start right now. I feel like it has brought me great success in life. I'm a former SEI ESL newcomer program and French teacher, and I'm also a former English learner director, and an adjunct professor. So it's nice to meet all of you. Today we will be able to identify language skills in the science and engineering practices. We'll unpack the language of developing models, and we'll touch on the bridge from talking about models to writing explanations in science. Today, we're going to ground my presentation in some documents and research. One of them is the Delaware Department of Ed Strategic Plan for Multilingual Learners. Priority 2, Centering Multilingual Learners and Statewide Educational Initiatives. Links to our presentation today, because we'll be talking about high quality curriculum materials, and I know that that's been a great initiative in Delaware. And we'll also be touching on multilingualism as an asset and how to bring that into the science classroom. I also wanted to say I'm getting over a cold/flu, so that's why I sound like a frog today. So if you can't hear me, just interrupt and tell me to speak up. So we're also grounding today's presentation in Stanford's key principles for L instruction. And the first one is that instruction focuses on providing Ls with opportunities to engage in discipline-specific practices. So we know that there are math practices, science practices, practices and habits of mind for ELA and social studies. So the language of these practices are super important. Also, we will be exploring how we can leverage students' home languages and cultural assets and prior knowledge using high quality curriculum materials in science. We're also, of course, connecting to NGSS because we'll be talking about science materials. And then also on how we can use peer and self-assessment as a formative assessment so that students assess their language and content as they work through the science and engineering practices. Another document that we're grounding today's presentation is this elements of high quality instructional materials in science. This was created by Massachusetts, but I think it's appropriate in all states that have initiatives to move us all toward adopting high quality instructional materials. So of course, we look that our materials are aligned to grade level standards, including the science and engineering practices, that they apply to the real world. And this is so important for our multilingual learners because high quality materials will connect to people from around the world that reflect our students' real lived experiences and home languages. High quality materials also support student sense making, and we know that that is so important for our multilingual learners, that they're engaged in grade level materials and that allow them to sense make as they develop content in language simultaneously. And high quality instructional materials in science are culturally and linguistically sustaining. So we want to make sure that tasks affirm our students' identities and home languages, and that all students have access to materials, and that we explicitly teach the language of science. That brings us to our last grounding piece of research, and it comes from Quinn, Lee, and Valdez. And they say that the high leverage practices to amplify with multilingual learners in science are, again, full participation in the disciplinary learning. This means the science and engineering practices, that we engage English learners in meaningful interactions to amplify and scaffold language development along with content, that we provide scaffolding to provide access to challenging content In other words, we scaffold up, we make language visible, and provide an explicit focus on how language functions in the discipline. And we will be definitely focusing on this today. So what are the science and engineering practices? So does anyone here co-teach in a science classroom or teach science units in their designated MLL or ELD classroom? Does anyone here teach science? Co-teach science? Excellent. Yay, Amanda. Anybody else? So I think it's helpful to acquaint ourselves with these science and engineering practices. So we're going to do a brief brainstorm in small breakout rooms. This document is the grade 6 to 8 version of the science and engineering practices, of which there are 8. And as you can see, these practices are loaded with lots of language, right? So each one of these practices has embedded within it some language skills that we need to either explicitly teach or support for our multilingual learners. So for example, asking questions and defining problems is super important in science. And for some of our students, we might have to explicitly teach how to ask different types of questions in English. As we know, question formation is pretty tricky in English. Or we might provide sentence starters as a support for different types of questions we might ask. So these are 2 examples of the types of explicit lessons and or supports we might give just for that science and engineering practice. So we are going to have you go into a breakout room and you will review the science and engineering practice assigned to your group. You're going to just kind of think a little bit about the language and skills that are embedded or that exemplify this practice. And then you're going to just jot down a few ideas. So I've made a slideshow for you, and your breakout room will correspond with the science and engineering practice that you are assigned. Does anyone have any questions about this task?
Kelly, super quick question. Do we want to kind of go fewer groups because we have 7 people?
Okay, so yes, if we have 7 people, maybe we want to double up in our breakout rooms, and maybe we'll just explore. I just want to make sure that we definitely explore 6.
Okay.
SEP 6 and SEP 2.
Just a second. So I'm gonna,
because that's the ones we'll be focusing on today. But if in your group you can take a peek at another one and add 1 or 2 ideas to it, that would be lovely as well.
okay. So we're going down to 2 groups, 2 SEPs. Give me just a second and we'll whisk you off there. Okay.
And we will put this is in the playlist, which is in the chat, but it's also, I just put the actual PowerPoint slideshow in the chat as well. But the playlist has other resources for you for after today. So if you go into the chat room.
Okay, I think we're ready, right? Whisking off.
Okay, great. Thank you. Does everyone have the PowerPoint slideshow?
We just spent the last several weeks doing an engineering and design activity where students had to they had to identify the problem, and then we had to build a design, and we actually had like a whole expo where we had judges come in, and families were invited to see, like, essentially it was a science fair. But this was a very interesting project throughout the course of the planning and the asking of the questions, especially for not just my MLL students, but my special ed students as well. I don't know.
Great. So does everyone understand where we're typing? So you're room 1, so you're going to type in SEP 2.
SEP 2?
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
And room 2. So this is great. I'm so glad we have someone here that is doing science with our kiddos. So you're going to look at the language of developing and using models, kind of like what the skills, and then kind of think about what kinds of supports you might give students. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, go broad too. It might be like a specific grammar lesson, but it also might be, translanguaging.
Okay.
Awesome.
When I click on the link, it opens but a very small window. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Sorry.
Okay, you've got it.
User error here. Okay.
Okay, so
All right.
yeah, so my scenario is different. So I work for emergent programs, Chinese emergent program. So some of our classrooms, actually, our the majority of our students have English background, but they are learning Chinese. But they also learn Chinese through content. Some of them have social studies in Chinese. Some of them have science in Chinese.
Okay, great.
So yeah.
So
So for me,
similar, if you were teaching, if they have science and they're doing the NGSS, how do we teach them the language for these?
right, yeah, yes, because a lot of teacher, I don't currently teach in the program. I support the teachers, but a lot of our teachers feel challenged to teach science content in
Mhm.
Chinese language because content and language were both challenging.
Yes.
Yeah.
So focusing on these science and engineering practices can help connect the two. So we might have to teach the language of models, right? Like arrows, flow,
Mm-hmm.
font, right? Or we might use a model to predict. So we might need to teach the language to predict. So the future tense, right? Or potentially the conditional tense. If we want students to be able to science and say what they think might happen, we need to teach the language to be able to say that in Chinese or English.
Yes, but for now, the science, I will say that maybe I have just limited knowledge about that. But for now, the science curriculum and the resources are most content, heavy content for focus.
Yes.
There are limited support for those students that also have language barrier, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's MLL or English language learners or using another language to learn the content, right?
Is the curriculum high quality curriculum? What curriculum are they using?
We are using, I think majority of them use Amplify Science.
Mhm. So Amplify Science also attends to the science and engineering practices, right? So that it might be helping the teachers to know that it's important to teach the practices along with the content,
Gotcha.
right? Because there's a lot of language in the practices, for example. Does that make sense? Can you think of any other supports? Viviana, can you think of any? Or Amanda?
We teach using the curriculum Vista Higher Learning and we have two groups, ELL 100 and ELL 200.
Mhm.
And what we love about that, it's not only fine-tuning the grammar and the English language and the speaking, reading, listening, and writing, but they also have a section where they do um, language for social studies, language for
Mhm.
math, language for science. And the students really love that because when they go to the core class, they have some of those foundational words already established. So it's easier to understand. So by me pushing in and as an interventionist into the biology class, having those students who have been exposed to the English language for math or
Mhm.
science or
Mhm.
even history, because I push into world history class as well. Um, Students just feel so much more confident and being
Okay.
able to grasp what the teacher is teaching
If you want
hands-on.
to give a specific example of the type of supports they use to teach the language of science.
So in the VHL curriculum will just basically give them, for instance, I'm going to just go with food. Why is food so important? Why does it have to grow? Why is it important for farmers to be able to produce the food when they grow? So they already are learning in ELL. Okay, the farmer's job is to produce the food, to plant the seeds, to grow the food and the farming. So when we get to the Serengeti and we talk about the desert and why are so many of the animals disappearing because of the dry land and they're not getting the food, that's where the students are like, oh yeah, similar to what when
And
we
what
had
language do you have to teach to help kids, though, I guess is my question.
just English, because like right now, I'm just like, okay, so how do you communicate when you want to eat and buy in your community? Where do people go in your community from place to place to
Mhm.
purchase food, to live? You know,
Yeah.
because a lot of the biology, really starts and talks a lot about, the plant and it grows and oxygen and why we need it and
Oh, so
all that.
on this chart, we're jotting down specific language skills and supports we might give. So cognate charts, are they
Mm-hmm.
helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Or if we have to predict something, should we teach the language to predict, which might be like conditional or future tense?
Mm-hmm.
So these are the
Mm-hmm.
types of things we're looking for on slide 2 here.
Yep.
Does that
And
make
we're
sense?
also role modeling in these ELL classes. So
That would
that
be
give,
great. I'll write down
yeah,
role modeling. But
yes.
does someone else want to type some of the other things in here? Some of the other ideas of the types of supports or explicit lessons we might have to teach language-wise to help students to be able to attain these skills that are
Mm-hmm.
part of high quality science.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Sentence the structure, sentence stems, and discussion, like discussion template.
Yeah, I love that. Discussion templates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Love it.
or kind of science talk, science talk, sentence starters like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Or even grammar function that correlated to science content.
I love that. So for developing models, the functions might be to predict or to describe. As it says,
Mm,
develop a model to describe unobservable mechanisms. So we might have to do language to describe. Fantastic.
Well,
Fantastic, everyone. So what are some of our ideas? I thought we could share. Group 2 could share some ideas, and then we could look at group 6, which these are the two steps we're going to focus on today. How do we make the language visible of the science and engineering practices? So what language as MLL teachers might we explicitly teach? And what sorts of supports might we give to our students? So what are people thinking from breakout room 2, SEP 2? I mean, sorry, breakout room 1, developing and using models. What did you come up with in that breakout room?
So just looking at what like our group came up with, just teaching the meaning of the academic vocabulary like used in those models of hold on, sorry, let me move my little cursor here. In the models of each like step for the science and engineering, but just teaching the academic vocabulary that goes along with any lesson, so that they're understanding the academic piece, but also like rephrasing certain words and phrases that we use in the English language that we may not like we English speakers may take for granted, but could have a different meaning in other languages, or just trying to understand like the literal versus the figurative meaning of certain words and phrases. Um, Provide visual supports as much as possible. So if we're going over the academic vocabulary, to provide like visual examples, show pictures, show charts, show, if it's thinking, I'm a math person, not aside from being science. So, but just showing pictures to show those real life examples,
Mhm.
backing that up with those cognates, the words that are similar in like both language. And I'm thinking of our population is mostly Spanish speaking. So trying to find those cognates between the two languages. And if with science and math, making predictions and making observations is such a huge part of like both content areas. Teaching the tenses of languages, that what it means to like what will happen in the future, or I predict this, and then using those sentence frames and sentence starters as much as possible to support them in their writing and their thinking.
I love it. Thank you. Great job brainstorming. Didn't give you all that much time. Would someone like to volunteer to tell us what you talked about for the science and engineering practice, constructing explanations and designing solutions? What did you come up with? Anyone want to share some highlights?
I don't want to hog the mic. We had some good conversations. Should I talk?
Sure.
All right, cool. I know 'cause Kate's moving between classrooms, and Sheila, I think you're in your office, right? Or in sequestered in an office. We had a great conversation. Actually, it was interesting to see how much crossover there is. So I needed to refresh on this. So this was really great. And I like the way that it's constructed to help us think about the language specifically. So in terms of language lessons needed, or the first bullet point question, obviously vocabulary such as qualitative, quantitative, variable relationship phenomena, right? Like the language of the discipline, and meaning making around that. Sentence level frames, writing conclusions, claims, etc., and the discourse level, talking about the purpose and the communication and how that happens in process. So Kate was kind of thinking about it through the WIDO lens and making sure that we're looking at language. Yeah, looking at language in the different dimensions. And then specifically, Ariana shared on the first part around supports needed to like ensure that the supports that you provide, that you kind of come up with, are teacher generated type of supports, that they're like culturally appropriate in ways and culturally specific concepts. So you're not utilizing or creating an idea or a support that actually detracts or just isn't aligned. And modeling of high leverage language, of what is expected to do in each step of the process. So we had a little conversation about how that drifts off at secondary, and that we really need to remember that that's an essential component of instruction at the secondary level, and modeling that for our secondary peers is vital. And then varied supports, right? To stretch academic language. Like we think about the PLDs, the proficiency level descriptors in WIDA, that really strengthening where they are, but like what's the next stretch? And somehow there's a crossover there with constructing explanations. And then of course, oral language development as a formative check, and feedback on content and language simultaneously.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your thinking and jumping in right off the bat. So I've also spent more. I gave you 6 minutes to work on that, a little bit more time on this, and this is in your playlist. So these are also some other ideas that I came up with, right? So planned in translanguaging, or we did developing and using models, teach the language of models and visual representation, display group consensus models. So this is in your document, just some ideas. None of them are, it all depends on your classroom, your curriculum, the lesson that you're actually planning. And most importantly, this is a great task that you can replicate with your co-teachers, right? So, or people that we collaborate with. I love when Andrea Honingsfeld always says, you don't have to co-teach to collaborate. So even if we don't co-teach in the same space, it's really important that MLL specialists and teachers of science get together because we can really help them tease out this language. And we need them because I don't know about you all, but it's hard to learn all the science and all the things and all the content areas. So this is in your playlist. This is an example of the type of task we might do. For example, if our students are reading charts, tables, oftentimes if we ask our students to read them, they might give us information from only one cell. Like, oh, what can you tell me about this table? Oh, it decreased 2.5, for example. And we know that we want much more from our students, and that in high quality curriculum, oftentimes their summative tasks require that they read an article, they get information from a table or a map, and then they write an explanation. So one type task that we might do to amplify the language of tables and charts would be to give our students, reporting connectors. These are from WIDA 2020 that introduce what the chart tells us, right? So in the chart, it shows that, right? So we want to apprentice our kids to the academic language to talk about tables. Or we might have them connect ideas across multiple cells using a comma which or a comma that, right? So the earthquake, the 2015 Nepal earthquake, comma, that happened near Mount Everest, had a change in elevation of a decrease of 2.5, comma, and satellite data showed, right? So we want to apprentice our kids to be able to connect ideas by building clauses. And it might be a little messy. They might end up with a run-on, but we want to at least teach them how to make meaning across a row of tables. So that's one example of how we might amplify one of the science and engineer practices and the language skills inherent in reading a table and making sense of it beyond one cell's worth of information. Another part that's of science and engineering practices and science in general is this multimodal meaning making. And in WIDA, we know now that there are 6 domains of language, right? We have reading, writing, listening, speaking, and now we have representing, which is the ability to create models and diagrams, as well as viewing, be able to interpret and make meaning from models. So, and how does this connect to core ideas in science? As always, just like language doesn't live disconnected from content, these science and engineering practices are also not skills we develop disconnected from content, right? So in the standards themselves and in high quality science materials, it will state that, for example, students will construct an explanation based on evidence for how environmental factors and genetic factors influence the growth of organisms, right? So they always work in tandem with the content, and this is how we develop language and content simultaneously. It's also important to note that there are actually 6 different types of explanations, right? And each explanation comes with its own kind of cool language. So there are sequential explanations that explain a phenomena in a linear sequence, causal explanations. Each step causes the next one, kind of like dominoes. Cyclical explanations, beautiful language, all of their own, right? So in cyclical explanations, the verbs change and the nouns themselves change, right? Like a frog, you get tadpole, frog, you get the thing itself changes as it goes through the metamorphosis. Systems explanations, how different systems work, how various components interact with each other. Factorial explanations, totally different kind of language, multiple causes or factors that lead to one outcome. And then consequential explanations, multiple outcomes from one input. And along with them come different types of visuals, right? So life cycles have a specific type of chart, right? And the arrows flow in a certain way. When there are multiple factors contributing to one event, the arrows all kind of point to one thing. So it's important that we apprentice our students to the different types of models and diagrams of science, and also how these diagrams work, how we talk about them, Do the arrows flow in a circular motion from right to left? Or do the arrows all point to the center, which is the outcome? So this language is really important to apprentice to our students because it's not everyday language and it doesn't usually show up in our tier 2 or 3 science books, right? It's just assumed that we know how to talk about charts and tables, diagrams. So multimodal meaning making in science for multilingual learners. It includes multiple modes, visuals, diagrams, gestures, symbols. And for our multilingual learners, the ability or the opportunity to even engage with models is a great scaffold, as we know, right? So for newcomers, we might have them draw a model of a concept and talk about it, right? And we give them some language to talk about it. And then we apprentice them from that to a full-on written explanation. Teaching multilingual learners to unpack and create models while developing the language to describe them is a critical practice for fostering both content and language understanding. So how do we do this? Well, we have mini lessons, right? Like, what is multimodal meaning making? Writers use images to communicate in all types of writing. In science, what kinds do we find? What information can images give us? What names are different images called, right? Are there charts, tables, diagrams? How do we read them? How do we create them? How do we make sure information is clear and precise? So for example, if we were learning about the water cycle, we might ask questions not only about the content, but also about the meaning-making aspects of the model, right? So in this particular model, I might ask, what shape do the arrows flow in and why? Does anyone want to answer that? What shape do these arrows flow in and why?
You could say it's a circle because all of the steps are ongoing and never ending, like a circle.
Nice. It's like a circle, never ending. I love that. Does anyone want to add to that?
Mainly how powerful the sun is, because the student would see how the arrow starts there first.
Okay, looks like it's maybe a little bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And why are these 3 red squiggly lines small? And why are they squiggly? What's going on there? And everyone say squiggly. That's a funny word in English. Squiggly
Wiggly.
or wavy.
Wiggly, wavy.
Wavy. Why are they wavy or squiggly? Why are they smaller? Why are there 3? Anyone have a guess?
They're separated.
Yeah, they're separated. Does anyone know? So we see the various aspects of the water cycle. We see condensation and rain. We see collection in the river. Then we go up to the tree, and it looks like something's coming off the tree. What are those squiggly lines showing us? Well, this is something that we're going to find out more about as we explore this phenomena more. But it would be great if we could make a prediction. Do we know, do trees give off any kind of water or gas? Right. So, for example, you would talk to the kids, talk about squiggly. And then furthermore, when we talk about the priority 3 in Delaware, like really honoring our students' multilingualism as a super cool superpower, this is a great space for also introducing translanguaging, right? So what if we give the student the same task, but we strategically group them with peers who can speak their language? And so what does this conversation look like? Does anyone want to be Sophia? Does anyone want to be Miguel and kind of read through this for us?
Sure, I can read Sophia.
Great, Viviana. And anyone want to be Miguel? You can see.
I can be Miguel.
Thank you, Kate. So let's go ahead.
First question, what shape do the arrows flow in? Why?
Es como un círculo porque el agua sigue moviéndose, no tiene un principio ni un fin.
Yeah, it shows the cycle never stop. It just keeps going from one stage to the next. Then again, it starts.
Por eso se llama ciclo de agua.
Okay. Next, what are the stages of the water cycle?
Fácil, evaporación, condensación, precipitación.
In English, they are evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and then the collection?
Nice. And then notice the student reflection. So when we provide space, sorry, for our students to translanguage, we also want them to reflect on this cross-linguistic awareness, right? So in this case, Sophia and Miguel noted that the diagram made more sense when they talked about it together, and that they knew some of the words in English, but that Miguel helped by saying them in Spanish. They weren't sure about those little red lines. They thought it meant something about trees giving off maybe gas or steam, but they weren't sure yet. And they noted that using English and Spanish helped them because they could explain ideas in different ways. And they also noted the cognates are the same, right? So when we honor our students' multilingualism, we plan in spaces for them to translanguage and to reflect on their use of both languages in meaning making in science. Another way that we might amplify the science and engineering practices when we're talking about models is when students make models, have them assess each other, right? In high quality curriculum for science, students do initial models, they revise them as they get more information, as they're predicting, and then there's a class consensus model. For example, in Open SciEd does this really well. So if we really want to teach our students the language of science, then we need to take some space to have them reflect on the language of creating models, right? So this is a type of peer review checklist. You might have students kind of give feedback on their models. Is it clear? Is the use of arrows make sense? And then, of course, provide some sentence starters to apprentice them to the ways that we want them to talk about their work. So to review, developing language to talk about and write about models, we want to deconstruct the language of models. We might joint construct models as a class. Again, in Open SciEd, they do consensus models. The class will create a model. And in that, we want to, again, be sure to explicitly teach language like arrows, flow, symbols, etc. And then also provide a space for students to develop metacognition and metalinguistic awareness as they reflect on their own models and the models of their peers. So this brings us to the next piece of how models and explanations are so connected. Models help students figure out what's going on. And once they have a model that shows a process or an interaction to explain, they can use this model as a foundation for explaining, right? So it's a great way to start using the language to write an explanation. So, for example, a student might develop a model of a DNA mutation leading to a change in a protein. Then they might use that model to explain how the mutation results in a new trait. They can do that orally, and then talking about their models orally is a bridge to them being able to write. So the mode continuum is bridging the spoken to written language. Spoken language is face-to-face. You can look for the person across from you to see if it makes sense or not. You can point. Students might say this points there, like an arrow points there. So we know it's not as academic because the audience is in front of you, right? So to bridge this gap, we want to make sure that we teach them to be able to say more academically, oh, this arrow flows to the right or in a circular motion because, right? So it's the bridge from the here and now when they're doing their hands-on experiment where all language is great, to this bridge in between the two where maybe we have them present to their partner where their language becomes a little bit more formal, right? And we want to apprentice that language. So we do that through language routines, class discussions, use of the home language. Then closer to the written end, we want to read explanations. and really notice the language in written explanations. We want to joint construct explanations and joint deconstruct them. So this is from Open Syed. And again, in high quality curriculum materials, there's, students are asked to model, and they do work students through basic models. Like, so in this particular unit, there are Post-its as the class kind of starts to rearrange their ideas for how animals' musculature might be connected to their genotypes. Then the model becomes a little bit more elaborate as they start putting in language that starts showing an explanation. And then at the end of the unit, students are expected to be able to write a written explanation. And that's also housed in the context. In this case, they're talking about cows and how some cows are more musculatured than others. And then we know that in a formal explanation of this phenomena, it might not even have a context. But what we see, even in our high quality curriculum materials, is that sometimes the mode continuum isn't quite bridged in the way that would benefit our multilingual learners. So what we see is this move from Post-its to the model with some language that shows explanation. And then the materials might simplify the explanation more, right? Just putting cause, effect. But we know this doesn't really help students write a much more complex explanation, right? But on the summative, they're expected to write an explanation. So as a co-teacher or a coach in a science class, as the MLL specialist, I would kind of amplify this language here so that students are able to write an explanation. And I would use WIDA 2020. So I'll quickly go through this. So this is what my written explanation might look like. And you can see that a flow chart of cause and effect isn't the same language as a written explanation. So how might I do this with our students? Well, again, amplify the language of the modeling, have students talk through the model, collect and display some of the kids' sentences from their joint construction, and then also provide mentor texts for students to have access to manipulate the language of a written explanation, making the language visible. So mentor texts they support students to work within their zone of proximal development. They provide good models of writing in the focus genre. They provide examples of available grammatical choices and how these choices shape the meaning of texts. They can be deconstructed with teachers to illustrate stages, the different parts of an explanation, and the specific language functions and features. They can be published, student exemplars, teacher created, AI enhanced. So for example, this is what a mentor, what me and actually in Fall River, Massachusetts, middle school science team, we created this together. So we wrote the answer, why do some cows have bigger muscles than others? And then we put the functions and features from WIDA on the outside columns. And together we kind of analyzed, well, what is the language in this? So before we looked at this and we knew, wow, there's a lot of language that happens in a written explanation. No wonder why our students have a hard time on the summative. We assume that they can just write this on the summative task, but we never really teach them how to read an explanation or how to write one. So using WIDA 2020, we said we're going to make a mentor text, know where we need to go, and then after the students have done the consensus model, and after we've done a collect and display, so they've basically said a lot of these types of things in more spoken language, we will make a written activity for them. So that will be our bridge of the continuum. So what we did was we took this text that you just saw and imagine that this is cut up strips of paper, pass it out to the students, and ask them to put it in order. That's the first piece. What's the order of this explanation and how do you know? So imagine that you've put these in this order and we're missing one of the cards, but that's okay. So far, can anyone tell me how we know number one is number one? Imagine that you put these in order from a cut up strips of paper. what is the chunk of text called number one?
Just stylistically, right? Like it's a question that's in larger fonts. And it's sort of centering what we're going to be reading about.
Yeah. So the title.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's the title. So we know titles go first and good explanations have a title. And then the chunk of text number two, imagining again that we put this here. Why would we put two there and then three where it is? Because we see the word first under number three. So what
I
are,
was going to say that might be tricky because looking at number 3 with that word first, that might trick some friends up thinking like, oh, that is what needs to be
yeah.
first aspect or
Mhm.
the first statement.
Yes. And that's okay because we could talk about it because we would talk about that number two kind of defines our phenomena and gives us a little background information. And that in an explanation, before we jump into the details, we want to kind of define our phenomena. So if we look over here, WIDA says that we describe valid and reliable evidence from sources about a phenomena through, and we define it through different kinds of clauses, right? So we also might like more complex language noticing might be that we start to see theme and rhyme, like which words are repeated in the text. So you'll see like the word chromosome and then right after chromosome. So the idea here is we talk about chromosomes, but we're going to take that idea, we're going to carry it up and add more information to it. We see it again here inside cells, chromosomes carry genes, and genes come in different versions called alleles. And this alleles is going to be new information down here. I'm going to repeat alleles, and I'm going to add on more information about it. Right, so this is called theme and rhyme or given a new pattern, and science often follows this pattern. So that might be a little advanced, but we might just notice that. We also might have students change the colors of the noun groups or underline connectors. Then we might notice also causal connectors. So in this case, in the curriculum, students are given a cause and effect flow chart, but in the actual explanation, the words cause and effect are not part of the explanation, right? So instead, what are the causal phrases that you see in this explanation? So we'll see the last one. Oh, Melissa got booted out. We'll see like if then. So these are the types of activities we might give our students to apprentice them to the language of explanations. And all of this is in your playlist. So I just want to make sure, can you see this? That in your playlist, all of these resources are here for you. So we do have overall cut up. Why do some cows have musculature? Kind of giving you what the language objectives might be for this type of activity, a little bit about the teacher prep that's necessary. And, depending on the student's level and how many times we've done this, again, we would cut these up and give it to them in a little file. First, they put them in order, noticing the overall structure or stages of their explanation. And then you can have them, I would never do all of these functions and features in one day with a classroom of students, but depending on your language focus for that day, might be just these causal connectors. Again, because the curriculum gives a cause-effect flowchart, but the word cause-effect is never part of the written explanation in this particular one, right? We see if-then type of statements as opposed to the cause is, the effect is. So all of these are in your playlist from today. And then our last activity is, our last mention is, can you see right now? Let me represent. Just want to make sure we're looking at the right thing here. Language objectives. So if we were to look at these language objectives, which ones do you think maybe would be touched on if the activities that we did today or looked at were part of a longer sequence of events in a week's worth of lessons.
Students can use relating verbs, has, belongs to show relationships and attributes to data.
Excellent, love it.
Students can use clause types, example, if then or because, to explain causal relationships in scientific phenomena.
Awesome. Thank you. So again, these come straight from WIDA 2020. So we looked at a mentor text. We're bridging from the talking about models all the way to writing, and we're explicitly teaching the language. We can't teach it all at once, so it's just small little nuggets, right? Small little language objective that we can focus on throughout the course of the year. So again, this is in your, let me just make sure that I can't see exactly what I'm presenting. So this is in your playlist as well. So there's a language objectives booklet. It's just, it's not the end all of all the language objectives in the world, but it kind of reviews what they might look like in Open SciEd. That's the curriculum, the high quality science curriculum that I work with most. And there are different types, right? So you could have WIDA explain or argue. Today we really focused on explain and models. Could also kind of have language objectives that are organized by the SEPs. So again, if we really focus on the science and engineering practices, that's why the people at Stanford said focus on them, because that's where the language is, right? Once we really kind of focus there, it's like, oh, wow, I don't have to teach just the vocabulary for the content, but I need to be able to teach my kids how to ask and define questions or the language to even talk about a model, for example. Or these are language objectives that align with the types of tasks that are in Open SciEd, but I imagine that they're similar to yours, right? And then there's some more explicit examples in here for you, how to make language objectives to really amplify the language of science and teach it explicitly, as opposed to simplify the content, right? So we want to make sure that we amplify for our multilingual learners, honor their home languages, their lived experiences, and teach the language to be able to do all the cool science stuff. So we have 1 minute left. Sorry, I ran out of time for questions. Any questions? You can write them in the chat. Sorry. Well, I hope.
No questions, but just so my head is spinning, Kelly. This is so amazing. Thank you so much.
Well,
So
thank
timely.
you. Thank you. I hope that it helps everyone. There's a lot there. An hour's really not enough time. I always get overly ambitious because I'm so excited. I love seeing our kiddos doing cool science. So just a reminder to check out the Padlet for additional resources, and that tomorrow begins at 9:30 with special guests. That's super exciting. You guys have had great presenters.
Are you going to be here for that? Nora, you can come too if you want.
Yeah, that's amazing. I will not be here. I will be on Martha's Vineyard. So I'm sorry to say that. But thank you very much for coming. Please make a copy of the playlist or download it so that you have it, and go back to those resources. I hope that you'll find them helpful. And Meng Yao, I think it'll be cool to see what that looks like in your Chinese immersion school. I hope that your teachers can find it helpful. Any final questions or thoughts?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the resources are very valuable, and I will make sure to share with my fellow teachers so they have the resources as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.